Welcome to the Excellence at Work podcast, where we explore the strategies and best practices that drive business success. I'm Rachel Cooke, COO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our podcast, along with members of our executive team. In each episode, we'll dive into the latest trends, insights, and real-world examples from some of the most exciting leaders from organizations worldwide. Be part of our journey and learn from the best as we discuss innovative approaches and cutting-edge technologies for talent management, learning and development, leadership, diversity and inclusion, and more.
Welcome to the Excellence at Work podcast. I'm Mike Cooke, CEO of Brandon Hall Group, and I'm super excited today to welcome our guest, Dr. Ashwin Mehta. You want to have a couple of words to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I'm Ashwin Mehta. I've been doing learning transformations, strategic transformations, and most recently I've been getting involved in this world of AI, which is interesting now, but it's been interesting for the last however many years. I did my PhD in learning technology adoption, started dabbling around that time, and it's something that continues to be interesting as we start to think about how we transform work. So very happy to be here with you today.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for taking the time. So let's jump right into it. I'd love to talk about human relationships at work and how AI is potentially changing workplace collaboration. And we can also explore some areas outside of work with AI as well, too, that we've spoken about before. So let's go into the collaboration aspect and what's changing with AI, you think?
That's a very interesting point, and I think that we're kind of in this age of pseudo-democratization of AI. So we have an increasing capability and access to things like ChatGPT, co-pilots at work, basically in some kind of agent which you can access, you can ask various things, you can start to explore the curiosities of life, and it's a very sort of innate human condition for us to be curious, for us to be exercise our ingenuity, to think about problem solving, and to figure out what information we need to do, the things that we need to do. And that's interesting for a couple of reasons. So the first reason is we have a human AI collaboration, which previously we didn't really have at the scale that we have now. So people can interact with an agent, and people can start to collaborate, and they can do this very individually. So if we think about the relationship that we all have with technology, it's embedded to some degree in our culture. So in US and Northern Europe, we tend to have an individualistic kind of relationship with our computers. So we have one device, maybe two devices, three devices, and we will interact with that device over and over again. And as you go across the world, people have different priorities over how they interact with this device. So you might have, in some parts of the world, you might have people sharing devices, you might have people interacting with the device and then talking to each other about the interaction that they've had in a way that maybe we don't always do in the context that you and I are in. So that's kind of one interesting side of it. But the other interesting side of it is, as we start to collaborate more with effectively a virtual agent, we collaborate more with other people? Do we collaborate less with other people? How do we share our thoughts? Because sharing our thoughts is also a very natural part of the human condition. You know, we do this on the weekend. You talk to your friends about things, and you share what you've learned, and they share what they've learned, and you shape your thought processes based on what others are doing. Right? This is the contextual nature of learning. So we're in this space with tech now, where we have access to things that have the potential to change how we interact with each other, and that's why this is such an interesting time.
No, I think it is. And, as you're talking, I'm thinking, how is this going to change work? Certainly. I know at Brandon Hall Group, I'm on my own personal company-wide project of how do I overlay AI to make us better, in every way. How can I use it for customer service? So we're answering people. We get emails Sundays at 3:00 in the morning, oftentimes, whether it's about a membership or our employee voice awards program. we try to get to those, but we have humans. There are a great customer service team answering these questions, but during busy times, we may get 1,000 emails in a week, right? And that's very difficult to, we pride ourselves in, we don't want good customer service here. We want to have fantastic customer service. So, my goal is to overlay this with sales, AI and customer service, AI and IT. Those are going to be great things, but the areas I worry about or I think about is, how is it going to impact the human relationships, if at all, right? And those are things I'm trying to find, some thinking around to make sure we're retaining that human element because that's so important.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting topic that this idea of customer service that you just mentioned. You get an email. Now, of the email, we think about relationships and we think about communication, and those two things are ever so slightly different because you can have transactional communications where I've
Yes.
sent an email and effectively I want an acknowledgement, or I've asked something that's fairly tactical and I want
Most
fairly
important thing,
tactical
just
answer.
be acknowledged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's very different to how we might form a relationship with a customer or how we might form a
True.
relationship with a colleague, because the outputs or outcomes that we want from a relationship might be goodwill. We might want friendship. We might want brand loyalty when it comes to
Hmm.
if you were in a company. And those things probably don't happen at the level that we're talking about, which is the transactional communication. And a conversation that I regularly get involved with when I'm talking about these kinds of things, which is the application of AI in enterprise.
Hmm.
A conversation is very frequent around, well, where do we actually add value with this? Where could we add value? What should we do? What do we not need to do? And if we think about our working day, don't know about you, but my working day is taken up with some things that are very high value, where I do the thinking, where I do communications, I have
Yes.
in-depth conversations with people,
Hmm.
and we dream of a better future, and then we architect that future, and we think about the steps that we need to take to get there. And this is the high value stuff. And then there are other portions of my day which are taken up effectively with administration, with things that are I'm clicking a button here because this system needs me to click a button, and this other thing needs me to have clicked that button before it then
Hmm.
activates. So we have the procedural side of life, which, these are the things that are really ripe for the opportunity of AI and automation. Because if I was free of the burden of doing those things, where I'm not really adding that value, I could be spending more time doing the big thinking, the dream building with my peers, with my colleagues, with clients, with
Hmm.
uh, other parts of networks, people like yourself. We start to talk
Yes.
about this future. And to me, that's where the value of human relationships lie. And the big opportunity around AI is to, free my mind from the burden of the lower level decision making and the lower level administration that I need to do.
Hmm. No, I get that too. I was reading an article, I think this morning, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, and there's all this talk of people potentially losing jobs because of AI. And I know executives who have, laid off content producers and replaced it with AI quite successfully. But one of the things I read this morning is it's not that AI will necessarily replace jobs, but 71% of managers and executives want to hire people now that have AI skill sets. Okay, so when you bring in a new potential employee, you want them to have a basic understanding of how to use a chat GPT, now Google Gemini, a Claude.ai for making things easier. So one thing that I know we've done at Brandon Hall Group, and I read about this someplace else, we actually use Read.ai, which is a great, it's like autopilot, but it's kind of on steroids. What I like to do is to load our notes from a sales perspective into Claude.ai and say, out of this transcript, please tell me the opportunities that we should be focusing on to provide the most value to this client. And then amazingly, it'll give you like 8 or 9 things. And oftentimes, just 2 or 3 things I haven't even thought about that could be adding value to a client. So when I talk about AI skills, those are like some of the basic skills I'm thinking of, from a sales perspective. What others are there that we should be thinking about?
So exactly that level that you've touched on, where we use AI to summarize, to get trends where we maybe otherwise wouldn't have thought about it. When
Mm-hmm.
I was initially looking at data science back in the whenever it was, many years ago. One of the first rules was to plot the data and eyeball the data to figure out if you have trends, if there's something obvious you can see. And that used to be something that was, you had to have some special tools, you had to have a
Hmm.
particular uh, background or a set of skills that would allow you to do this. And now we can put
Right.
this into an agent and we can get that out and we can get insight. And that's very valuable. As you start to get to if we think of skills as effectively a pyramid or maybe a ladder, we start to move up the rungs of complexity. And we think about using models that are widely available, things that are accessible to everybody. These are the chat GPTs and the Copilots and Claude and all of these
Hmm.
sort of
Yes.
base models that are out there. As we start to move up, we might be thinking about, well, how do you do something that's a little bit more specialist in a model or an environment that your enterprise might have created itself. And this might require you to have company documents or company proprietary information, things that you don't want to get out into the rest of the world, but you want to keep to yourself. So you need some kind of secure environment, and the skill sets to build that secure environment, they're in the IT space, of course.
Hmm.
But then you might need to interrogate those. You might need to build the data structure. So you start to think about not
Right.
only AI literacy, but tangential things or adjacent things, which are data literacy and digital literacy as kind of broad skill
Hmm.
sets that a workforce should have. And then as you move up into the realms of making your own models, most of us aren't really there. But these
Yeah,
would be
that's
the
true.
hardcore engineering skills that one might need.
Hmm.
But in that sweet
Right.
space between building your own model and using publicly available models, there's a lot of gap there for augmenting, for tweaking, for
Yes.
customizing, which there's quite a wide variety of skill sets in there, I think.
Hmm. There is, and it's not just a matter of plugging things into a AI chatbot and boom, it's done. We're experimenting with that as well to try to train a large language model on our own research, our own insights that we've gathered for whether it's the last 10 years or 30 years. We're working through those processes too, and it's not easy necessarily right now. It takes a lot of time and a lot of
Yeah.
effort and a lot of research on it. So I think that's going to be really key for all companies, whether you're a smaller organization or happen to be a Fortune 500 company. Um, I've been using, and some people would refer to it as AI. I kind of call it a preference engine, right? Because I have Amazon Alexa, and it always
Hmm.
like alerts me when my paper plates, need ordering, or if I need to order eye drops or something, I can just say, Alexa, please order paper plates, and it just does
Yeah.
it, which I think is really amazing. I don't think that's necessarily an over reliance on AI, but I think if we're not careful in the workplace, we could see an over reliance of AI. And what I think about personally for my kids, but also in the workforce, is having an over reliance on AI. Is it going to take away their ability to think and to process things, or is that going to be now more commoditized through AI? Because now you can write a business plan through AI if you want to, and it'll
Yeah.
be reasonably pretty good. What do you think?
Well, I think it's one of the big risks that we're not really having a conversation about generally, and that is that there are these innate parts of our human condition, I mentioned them earlier, which
Yes.
are being curious, solving problems, and this is where we have cognitive engagement. And
Yes.
the more we do with AI models, there was a paper a couple of months ago, which it was a university study, but it was looking at the increase in procrastination and the decrease in cognitive engagement, and therefore leads to like memory loss and things like that for university students. So the more they used AI agents, the more they were procrastinating, the less productive they were generally, and the less they
Hmm.
engaged with the materials. And
Huh.
it was a single study, so it wasn't necessarily like a meta-analysis or a grouping of lots of empirical research. But some of the early research that's coming out is very interesting in this respect. Now, it leads us to think, well, when when I was in university, I was reading and critically engaging with lots of papers so I could understand them.
Hmm.
And I still remember those studies and I still remember the outcomes that I was reading about. And as we move towards, it's not just AI, of course, it's things like social media as well, where we start
Hmm.
to move towards decreased attention span, decreased engagement with materials, short form
Yes.
content, these kinds of things. We are moving towards effectively a model of work where we're accessing information at the point in time of need. And this, over the last possibly 10 years, I can remember this as being a thing that we all wanted. We all wanted learning and flow of work. We wanted real-time information, point in time
Yes, we did.
access. Now
Hmm.
we have it. And now we have it. What are we doing with it? And this is a purpose question more than anything else. But if we're using it to engage with information in a way that we don't have to engage with that information, then naturally we can't expect the benefits of engaging with information, which is where we have we're building a library of skills. We're building expertise and experience all the time
Hmm.
because we are engaged in the process of solving problems within the domain in which we work. I do a
Hmm.
particular thing. I have many years of experience in solving problems in that thing. If I'm not solving those problems, then 10 years from now, I won't be able to claim that experience or expertise. And
Hmm.
this is a longer term risk. We don't know how it's going to play out because we're in fairly new territory right now. But
Hmm.
it's something that I can see is something we're going to have to watch as leaders in enterprise. Because what do we want from the workforce of the future? We want this experience. And when you were talking about
Right.
AI skills, we were saying that we want the skill to be able to interrogate a model. That's great. But we also want the skill to be able to action the information that we found. And we want the
Hmm.
skill to be able to apply that information against the problem and adds value to a business, adds value to society, adds value to a community. So these things kind of go together. And when we talk about the human aspect of this, we want to be adding value to the world and making humankind better, ideally. These are the
Hmm.
kinds of things we want to
Yes.
do. And that also requires a little bit of a skill set in figuring out where value actually is.
Yeah. No, and it comes to, it's, I'm thinking, boundaries, right? So how do you set boundaries in the workforce with employees who are, we're all human, right? We're people. So at some point, I think we're going to see an over reliance on AI and not a lot of boundaries. But I do think you have to set boundaries for where and how you use AI, both morally, ethically, and that's I think is going to be a bigger question over the next year or two, especially as it advances, which we know is just it's going to advance by leaps and bounds from where we are at today, and where we're going to be at literally in 3 to 6 months, I believe.
Some of this is coming out in the new regulatory environment. So that there's an AI Act coming out in the EU. I think there's one in the
Hmm.
States as well, where some of these issues are being explored to some degree, and what risk mitigation will look like in the future is going to play out in the
Yeah.
market, right?
Hmm. Right. I'm not a big person on government regulation, but I remember speaking about it last year. I think this is one of the things you need some government regulation on, right? You have to have a little bit of a watchdog organization, making sure, where's the authoritative data sets? How do you make sure it's not too extreme, politically speaking, to the left or to the right? There's many other examples to go along with that, but those are things where yes, there is some government regulation happening in the states, and I think there should be. I just want to make sure, depending on who's regulating it, what's how are they regulating it, right? And making
Yeah,
sure it's in the middle or unbiased, and again, not too far to the left or too far to the right, politically speaking.
yeah, and of course, who watches the Watchmen is always going to be a question. That's right.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, one of the things I think is pretty amazing is just our ability, as people, even going back thousands of years, hundreds of years, we have a great adaptability to technology, just as people, right? And you can go back to, the printing press. You can go from the manual typewriter to, the word processor to the, now the computer, right? I used a manual typewriter in my late teens, and I was like, oh, this is great. And then you got the word processor. We could wipe things out, with a mistake. It almost felt like cheating. And I kind of get a sense when I see companies, leveraging AI now, especially content producers, bloggers out there, it's almost like they feel they're cheating a little bit, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
what's the line between cheating and not? And I have kids in college and high school and going into middle school next year. I get asked all the time, can I use AI to do my homework? And I'm like, I don't know, what's the policy, right? But, leveraging AI, there's a potential to learn more, right? But there's also the potential where you stop the ability to think. And the example you brought up, you still, you did all the work of going through all the papers, everything else during your educational period and getting, smarter. And you remember those now. I fear that we're going to go through this and we're just not going to remember stuff. So it's great that we can adapt and people are flexible. But I think that's another area that we have to really be concerned about, both educationally, in academia and in professional,
Yeah.
in the professional workspace too.
I think it's back to this point of purpose. I had a discussion with a colleague who runs a startup, and in that discussion, we were talking about, as you can see, I play music, right? We were talking about
Yes.
AI generated music, and we're having this conversation about how good is it. And I pivoted the conversation, as I sometimes do, to, well, what's the purpose of music? Because the purpose of music could be we are making a corporate video and we want a soundtrack that's going to be quiet, and then there's going to be a voiceover over that. And we're in the content space now. And we're producing content for an audience. We want to get a message across. The music isn't really the point. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have this idea that bands like Nirvana were around, and they were voicing the angst of a generation. They were putting something forward the society was expressing, and that moved the needle in how people were listening to music and the type of music they were listening to. And the purpose of music was something very different. It was a cultural purpose. And when we think about this idea of purpose in nearly everything that we talk about, it comes to it's something that really gives us this talking point where we can think, well, in the point you just gave, what is the purpose of education? Because if the purpose of education is to know how and when to access information, then sure, why wouldn't we just be training people on using these models? If the purpose of education is to expand one's horizons, to be able to engage with your context and your environment more effectively, if the purpose is to be able to engage with your fellow man and push the needle of humanity, these are very different things. And
they are.
Depending on the activity that we're doing, the purpose might be slightly different. So I think as a catch-all, I'd probably say that these technologies, Mesthine, I think, was the academic. Maybe I have a book. Dude, there's a book, right? So
okay, I gotta pick that one. I have to pick that one up.
Lots of books on the shelf. But Mesthine, 1971. So technology is a way in which man engages with his environment. And it was 1971, so we talk about humankind now rather than mankind. But we might say that regardless of the technology, it's a mediating means. It's a way for us to engage with our environment and extract meaning and then enable change. And I don't see AI as being any different. It's just down to the idea of purpose.
Yeah, I mean, we're really talking about balancing. How do you balance AI with protecting these human relationships? And the human relationships are important. I mean, look, you're at our conference in February, it seems like yesterday, but it was about 3 months ago, I think. And, you can't we could easily hold a virtual conference with 500 people, right? Like technologically speaking, but you wouldn't get the same impact out of it, right? You wouldn't be able to have, share a drink, like me and you shared a drink outside, I think, and I was having some sushi. That's a memory, right? I can't create that type of memory or bonding with, a client, a human, a person, like yourself doing it online. This is all very well and good. We've had lots of conversations about this. But, the human relationship aspect, you still have to keep. I fear as people get out of university and they go into the workforce that they won't know how to speak to people face to face, right? In the old days, when I was being hired to be in sales, I had to meet people face to face on a daily basis. some people I didn't know, most of who were far older and at that point in time way more successful and more knowledgeable than a 22-year-old kid walking around Manhattan. But I learned a lot from all of them, even my failures. And I think I've probably learned more from where I have failed than with my success. I don't think success teaches you anything, actually. Thankfully, I had a lot of failures when I was younger, so now it's just all the way up for myself. But yeah, balancing the human relationships. When we get new people in here that are younger, I want them to be able to speak to clients, whether they're 25, 20 years old, and 30. And everybody has a different level of how social they can be, whether it's in the workforce or outside of the workforce. But that's something I think we're definitely going to have to balance as we move forward with this.
And that's an interesting point from a slightly different reason for me, and that is that we recently had a pandemic which forced everybody to work remotely, and we weren't having a conversation then around AI. So, but the outcomes were the same, and that is that we had a whole generation of kids in school, of graduates, of folks who were entering the workplace who did not have face-to-face interaction for possibly a couple of years. And
Yes.
I think we did see a change, whether that's good or bad, but we saw a change in how they interact with others, the power of speech to converse with somebody, to present on a stage with an audience of your peers in front of you, but also the levels of anxiety that one has in social interactions. I think
Hmm.
all of these things have slightly changed, and it's it's not only technology that and technology allowed us to
Hmm.
do remote work, but I think that it's the
Yes.
isolation aspect. And while you were talking, I was reflecting on what you were saying. Is something that I've noticed in some of my research and also in some of my travels that nearly every culture that I come across has some kind of bonding ritual which involves the shared consumption of something. So whether we're talking
Yes.
about breaking bread together, we're talking about smoking the pipe of peace together, every culture has something that involves two people
Hmm.
or multiple people sitting down in each other's presence, observing each other's body language, hearing the cadence of one's voice, being able to exchange ideas freely. And that is paramount in our interactions. And the question, while you were talking, I was thinking of this, so that I was thinking back during the pandemic, during that entire period of remote work, did I make any new friends? And actually, I did. I made a couple of new friends, which I'm still hanging out with today, but in a face-to-face way. Did you make any new connections or new friends remotely?
Yeah, I would say absolutely remotely. And I think, you know, when you talk about, the human side, right? Like I think about the pandemic and some bad things certainly came out of that, like um, greater depression among everybody, more domestic violence, increased alcoholism, right? And that's what happens sometimes from an isolation aspect. But, this year and last year especially, one thing I noticed that I think the pandemic caused in a positive light is I can be on a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting or whatever it is, and kids are coming up to their father or their mother. They're right there while we're talking business. I notice I'm more relaxed. I have my daughter with a lacrosse stick, tossing a ball up behind me, and I'm not even like going crazy. That would never happen out of 3,000 meetings that I might have had 3 years ago throughout the
Yeah.
year online. It just wasn't, it wasn't appropriate. But now it's kind of like, I'm not saying it's appropriate, but it's acceptable. And I think we created a level of tolerance for people, which is,
Hmm.
is great. That's why I worry, and going off topic a little bit, which we did speak about, and you had, three words that kind of summed it up perfectly is we were talking about the 4-day work week, which is a
Yeah.
big controversy more and more. And it's like, let's do the 4-day work week. Let's pay people for 32 hours, cut out meetings. You can still get paid for 40 hours. And that to me is a little bit extreme, but where the 4-day work week used to be thought of is, with programmers, if you're working 12, 15-hour days, Monday through Thursday, and I'm a business owner and I can get 48 hours out of you and you need time off on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that's great. But now the 4-day work week is getting condensed to, well, you should just have a 4-day work week. And, for me, I'm a little bit old school with that. I think you work when your clients work, right?
Hmm.
So if your clients are working on a Friday or a Saturday, you work. Our clients work on Saturdays and Sundays. Guess what? I have to make sure I'm checking and making sure everything's covered. And I think it's important. And I do think there's a place for a 4-day work week. It's called part-time work when you're going through college, working at a Starbucks, for example. Okay, that's how I see the 4-day work week. So I'm not against it. I just think that I think we're losing a lot of the human element with thinking about 4-day work weeks. And it's not for everybody. Maybe for folks coming in, you can stagger customer service, staffing hours appropriately. Sure, if that's something that works. But I go back to the isolation aspect, right? Not everybody can go on a 3-day weekend on a jet to the Bahamas, right? So there's more of that isolation aspect, which is exactly what we don't want. We saw the causes that isolation can cause or the issues that isolation can cause during the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the 3 words
I'm
you
with
said,
you.
by the way, the 3 words you said before that, really summed it up is, at the end of the day, business is competition.
It is.
It is. And if you have one business working 60 hours a week and another one with their employees working an average of 40 hours a week with the same skill sets, the same talent, the 60-hour work week is always going to win. Always.
Yeah, I'm with you on most of that. I think my reflection is that the work needs to be done. It needs to be done in a way that satisfies the outcomes. And is there a future where we stop thinking about hours? Because I've been at work at 2 a.m. doing things. I've done 80-hour weeks and all of this stuff in the past, and because the work needed me to do that and to achieve the things that I wanted to achieve. And we can talk about the locus of control being employers versus employees. Some people are going to be driven. It's the eye of the tiger kind of mentality.
Yes.
Some people are going to be hungry and some people are going to go for it. And some folks are going to want to stop at a particular hour and then go and do something else.
Yes, of course.
In a society, we're going to have to accommodate for all of those people. But as long as the work is done, it should be okay. The balance of hours should be a little bit flexible. But yeah, I agree. If clients
absolutely
need something, that's what the work requires. That's where to some degree, that's where the revenue is, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, always, right? Because you have to, somebody has to pay you. I always tell folks that we bring in here, sometimes it is, 40 hours and you may be super productive and that's great. Go spend time with your family. If there's a fire drill, if there's something that has to get done last second, then, sometimes you're going to have to put in the extra time and figure it out. Yeah. But I think the flexibility of it is great. And I agree with you. It'd be great if we could just say, we're not worried about hours. We're worried about results at the end of the day. If you're so good at 40 hours and you can do the same work as somebody working 55 hours, God bless you. Let's, make it happen. No problems with that. So thank you for that. So to wrap up, what types of predictions do you see, maybe not in the next 6 months, but looking out 3 to 5 years, how do you see AI changing? How's the dynamics going to further change than what we've experienced so far? Do you see a lot of movement in that? Do you see something that may sound so outlandish at this point in time, but in 2 years when we look back on it, we'll say, wow, Dr. Mehta really knew his stuff and he was absolutely right. No pressure.
Can't predict the future, but I think there are a few things that give us indicators, right? So the first thing is, if we think about how we use AI in our day-to-day life, the way I use AI in my day-to-day life is and I mean personal life. I don't necessarily mean professionally. I'm using Google Maps. I'm using some of the things which we have forgotten are actually AI enabled.
Don't even think about it, right?
So we have these almost hygiene factors in our life that we take for granted. I'm on Amazon, I'm on Netflix, I'm getting recommended things. You didn't buy this thing, you still need it. You gave this example earlier,
right?
And these are things that are just part of our lives day to day. It's there. We also have this in the Internet of Things idea, where increasingly everything is enabled in some way. I bought. This is going to sound weird. I bought a toothbrush yesterday. Right? And the toothbrush is Bluetooth compatible. There's an app. It's AI enabled. So while I'm brushing, given my brushing history over the last, I only bought it yesterday, but let's say my brushing history over the last 3 months, it will apparently, I haven't tried it, apparently it will give me a map of my mouth and it will give me brushing recommendations based on trends in good brushing, I guess. So we have I think we're going to see sort of almost invisible AI just sneaking into parts of our life where we didn't previously consider it, and we won't notice. It will just be quality of life upgrades. And we'll come to this point where AI is just acceptable. It's just all around us and we're just using it. Now, that's very different to the idea of generative AI in the workplace, because from a
Yes.
learning and development point of view, or human capital point of view, we are increasingly use it for first drafting of content, and we keep the human in the loop. Why is that? Now, that's probably the same as the same kind of arguments as autonomous vehicles. So we can think of self-driving cars. We can think of a car that can actually drive itself, detect pedestrians, avoid collisions. Are we there yet? Well, we're not there yet from a cultural and regulatory point of view of how acceptable this is.
Hmm.
Are we there yet
Right.
technically? Well, we're ever closer, right? So I think in the content space, we'll probably get to this point where we have tiers of acceptability in our content where we say that can be made by AI. And then we'll start to reimagine what the value of content actually is. Because what is the point of churning out lots and lots of content when we just have
Hmm.
agents around us? That opens the door to
Yes.
the idea of agents just being part of our lives, virtual agents. And I can see sort of medium term, everybody just is using agents for day-to-day activities, making our lives easier. And this is the workplace quality of life upgrade that we kind of need. So
Yes.
I
Hmm.
think we'll start to see quality of life in work and personal be slightly different. Is there likely to be a sea change in what AI does? I think there's a lot of chatter around sort of artificial general intelligence. Can we have a machine that does what humans do? I think we're quite a way off. So I'm not thinking that's not going to hit us in 25, I don't think, but maybe I'm wrong.
I have a really important question. What's the name of the toothbrush?
Oh, it's an Oral B IO, right?
Okay.
No, I'm not
I don't know why,
advertising
but I
it.
kind of want to get one myself.
I
No, this is a completely unsponsored show, so just
actually I was
that's great.
wandering around Costco and I saw it and I thought, why not? And that was just an
That's
impulse buy.
cool.
Yeah.
I like that. Mhm. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I like it. All right. Well, look, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. You are welcome back anytime. I know you're also very busy. It's what time is it there right now? 3:39.
Yeah, 339.
Where are you at?
Yeah.
Okay. So I know you still have some work to do, but a shout out for all our human listeners. I really appreciate you listening. Dr. Mehta, again, thank you. It's always a joy, and look forward to continuing our human relationship for as long as possible. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.